So I am Laguna Pueblo. I am from the Laguna Pueblo. That's where I have many family there, and that's the whole reason for me moving from another part of the Southwest. I was in Tucson and amongst the Tohono people for about 20, 25 years or so, and then I moved out here in 2009. I'm also Dene, Papa Lakota, Assiniboine, and Sioux. So this is me. So this all comes down from the Indigenous research paradigm that Dr. Lori Lambert came up with. And it has at the center Indigenous from a place, your heart and voice, why you want to do this research, tribal and cultural specific, your voice and passion. So it really corresponds with what people were sharing yesterday as well, that everybody's work is coming from a very similar place of where we're seeing areas that they need to be, or that definitely needs some more focus. So starting from the top, community collaboration and permission, survival and recovery, marking the community part and looking at past historical trauma. That is imperative that happens. Dissemination of data in a way that the community understands, ownership and sharing of knowledge, tribal protocols, elders, tribal council, ethics and respect, community Indigenous epistemology and ontology, community interest and need, community empowerment and self-determination. So I'm sharing this with you first because this spiderweb model is has really, I saw it initially a few years ago, and it's stayed with me over the years, and it really impacts what we're all doing, and all of us that get to work with tribal colleges, that there's really the center of what we get to work with here. So the process of engaging Indigenous students in a classroom is a multi-layered and complex process. Everybody will experience working with their students and in the classrooms differently, and yet it is important that what we are there. It is imperative that there is understanding of the myriad types of learning. So not everybody comes to the classroom with the same type of knowledge and information, and that's really what this study has focused on. This is part of my dissertation study that was looking at students in general, what tribal college students need in general, and then it came down to the focus of what previously incarcerated Indigenous students were experiencing in the classroom, and I will get into that shortly. When Indigenous students are mitigating the Western educational process, they might not see their time and experiences as being valuable to contribute to their worldviews. That is huge. That is important. That all of us have had one aspect or another of Western schooling, and that's where many of us are still there. And so, trying to negotiate that while people are leaving childhood, adolescence, going into adulthood, tribal colleges play an extremely important role in all of that. And with that comes all these different pieces that are part of that. Are part of understanding what students are bringing to the classroom. So we go back to the model that Dr. Lori Lambert, who's Mikpak and Abenaki, I believe, apologies if I mispronounced that, examines the problems that researchers encounter when adjusting research methodologies in the behavioral sciences to Native values in tribal community life. And that is important because it is not just, like people said yesterday, it's not just one size fits all. So we need to be prepared to look at those different areas of need. So this model demonstrates how to value life and experiences, and certainly ways to learn from one another, because Indigenous interests, knowledge, and experiences must be at the center of methodologies in the construction of knowledge about Indigenous people. That was from Lori Lambert in 2014. And I state that because it is important. It is important to include all of the knowledge that students bring into the classroom, that we bring into the classroom, that all the different people that are involved in the education, and then the Western education too, of the students, that it is all important, because there is the hope that they are going to earn degrees here at their tribal college, and that they will also go on to pursue further degrees within Western education too. And that is important to really have that encouragement there for them. And that's what I say here. The engagement of every student in the classroom experience demonstrates the need for every person in the room to have value. It is imperative that all those different pieces are there. So in looking at what Dillard had talked about, this value includes their ability to voice their oppression and to understand their reality. This opportunity to value voice is important whether students share their experiences of being previously incarcerated or keep the information to themselves and discussing the impacts of ongoing colonial genocide that Anita Lucchese had talked about in 2019. And that is important because in looking at at the various types of knowledge that students are bringing to the classroom, the issue of incarceration, it kept coming up. It kept coming up that not every student was incarcerated, not previously incarcerated, yet that was part of many students' experiences. And the more that I looked into different areas of information, to learn about, I knew that there were roots back into colonization. I just wasn't, too sure like how those different pieces fit together. And in looking further, there's a huge gap that is is not focusing in on students that previously incarcerated Indigenous students. And there are some studies that are being conducted in looking at students of color, yet not at our own people. And so that's where I wanted to really focus in on that. And that became the focus of my dissertation study. So when Indigenous students are mitigating the Western educational process, their time and experience is being valuable and contributes to their worldviews. That is extremely important, that they have so much knowledge that they are bringing into the classroom that it is often overlooked because they might be seen as just having a target on the back that, people know to one degree that they might have been previously incarcerated. So like, oh, well, this person's been in jail. They're just somebody who goes to jail. Yet we all know that that everybody has so many different layers to themselves. And that, of course, that just because that was part of someone's experience, that does not define them completely to who they are in the classroom or in any other setting. So also, as an Indigenous person, I want for the students in the classroom to know success, and to know success not only in a Western context, but to have success all around it in many different contexts. And that's where, and I believe that's where each of us needs to have the hope there. And I believe many of us do. And it's just different, and it's a process. And when Indigenous instructors see themselves in the process of learning, the application takes on a very different meaning. It definitely makes it deeper and more meaningful, and that it's really what we're all doing here. And let's see. To date, including all populations has not been part of the focus of TCUs, even when all tribal colleges work to strengthen the cultural heritage of their respective tribes. And that was from Bad Moon back in 1990. So, and this is not a criticism of TCUs. TCUs, tribal colleges are play an extremely valuable and important role in the lives of individuals. Yet, it is important to look at the fact that that the population of TCUs is very different from the first inception of TCUs in 1968, and it's very different now back in 2020, back now in 2021. And so, looking at the different ways that that students are coming to the classroom, it's important to look at what this new generation of students need. So Dr. Sean Wilson had talked in Research and Ceremony, had said, it is the voice from our ancestors that tell us when it is right and when it is not to talk about certain things. We talked about Indigenous research as a life-changing ceremony. And his work, along with the other work of other knowledge keepers, has really shaped the way that I've looked at many of the different how to approach being in the classroom. And one of the things that I know that I've spoken with other colleagues about is that we want to challenge the students so that they're not experiencing culture shock after leaving a tribal college and going to a four-year university. And primarily because students, they do come to the classroom with a variety of different types of information and knowledge, yet it seems to be different than what they are experiencing in the Western style classroom that we do have. And we need to be able to shift gears so that they are not continuing to be marginalized and not have access to education and information, and feel like that is even for them. And so, I'm still getting to the bottom of figuring out, if the culture shock that that could be experienced is something that happens amongst a large group of students, or if it's not. So I look forward to hearing from people later to gauge your experiences as well. There is a focus on marginalization in society and in educational settings that examines the definitions of school-related success that previously incarcerated Indigenous students define for themselves and or defined by. And that is huge, because that goes back to what I was speaking about previously, about how many students feel like they have a target on their back, that they're like, well, this is how people see me. This is pretty much all that I am. It's like, no, you weren't, knowing that students are so much more than that. It is important to look at those different pieces. So the study that I was able to do over the past couple of years, the study focused on how these students envision success differently from traditional college students. This study offers a counter narrative of a marginalized student population by showing and making meaning of the voices, experiences, and perspectives of a student population rarely heard from in higher education. So my initial research questions were: one, what does academic success mean to previously incarcerated Indigenous students? And when I was talking to the students, they all needed to self-identify as being previously incarcerated. I put some flyers out, and they contacted me. And versus me, saying, oh, okay, so this person may or may not have been incarcerated. They may or may not have discussed us in the past. And it was so amazing just getting a chance to talk to different students. What does academic success mean to previously incarcerated students, PIIS, in adult basic education programs, ABE programs at tribal colleges and universities, TCUs? How are the experiences of incarceration seen by previously incarcerated Indigenous students and their instructors? So I talked to both students and instructors to see, what some of their perceptions and thoughts were. Number three, what do previously incarcerated Indigenous students need to be academically successful to attain degrees in a tribal college? So these questions were both large and hopefully inclusive, and yet they were also specific to looking at what previously incarcerated Indigenous students need to be academically successful and to attain their degrees in a tribal college. So I started at one tribal college, and I will be expanding to others to see what other people think and what they have experienced. So what I did find is that the study revealed that there needs to be a training program for previously incarcerated Indigenous students that takes on leadership roles of their own, and it is clear that the 4 R's must be integrated: respect, relevance, reciprocity, and responsibility. So that goes back to the work of Kirkus and Barnhart in 1991. And this is important. These 4 R's have a new appearance in 2021. 2 new programs and prevention programs are currently in place, yet it is not clear if tutors are prepared to listen beyond discussing the topic at hand. So for example, if students go into the classroom needing assistance with writing an essay. You know, they can get assistance there with working on an essay. That's what the tutors are trained and prepared for. Yet it is not clear if there is assistance beyond that, and that's really not the fault. It's not anybody's fault. It's just it is not the fault of the departments. It is not the fault of the people that are there. It's not anyone's real fault. I mean, no one can really solve colonization. No one can really go back and say, okay, so this is what we are doing here to solve colonization. But this is what we can do now in this particular context. So these programs are geared towards students that seem to need other students that share their experiences and to share this with the previously incarcerated students. So for example, two student participants, Candace and Rochelle, those are both pseudonyms, discuss that it shouldn't be about what happens after incarceration, but it should be about helping to prevent incarceration from happening. So there are, you know, like an entire variety of how people are thinking about some of these situations. Candace asked, how can we create a culture where students don't feel like they have to engage in toxic behaviors? They will ultimately get students arrested and cause issues for their academic and their career pursuits. When I was talking to the students, their responses, they were so loaded and they were so deep and they were meaningful. It was just, I was so appreciative, so appreciative to be there, to be able to listen to them as they were talking. And honestly, I think that was one of the ways that looking at how students can be, how you can work directly with students in the classroom. And I found that when I just sat there and I listened, it gave them the opportunity to open up and to share. She went on to say that she was struggling at the time of the interview and said, I can't even leave the state without letting someone know. And when the school shut down, I didn't really have a place to stay. So I felt so bad because I was kind of bouncing around at friends' places until I was given permission to leave and go home. And this entire pandemic, it forced many of the students and relatives, people that we know, sometimes ourselves in this meeting here, who didn't have, you know, the continued home security that that was definitely evident in these stories here. And I don't know if you know, I don't know, no one really gave an answer to how to deal with this, but all I was able to do at this point was listen and to see what was being talked about there. Discussing drug and alcohol use and the harmful impacts it can pose on academic success is important. The scared straight tactics of previous years were a good start, but students that have experienced incarceration need something more. And that goes back to how it just needs to be different here in 2021, that we can work with students in the sense of looking at what they need, what they've experienced. But if people don't have the appropriate training, then it is hard to tell how to actually help and to work with the students there. Some of the special directives they need came from experience, from people that also experienced incarceration. Okay, I'm gonna go by quickly. So ultimately, they need to hear the words of their peers as they are putting together different types of programs and figure out what works. They need to hear the words of their peers. Therefore, there needs to be training programs that integrate their funds of knowledge. So the knowledge that they are bringing to the classroom, and so that they don't feel like so they've experienced incarceration and that's pretty much it. And it's like, no, there's so much more. And so they've been the ones who have also talked about that there is so much more. These programs need to encourage self-advocacy and encourage class attendance. And that's really what came about. When people felt like they were valued and needed in the classroom, then they went to class more. there was better class attendance, and and you could see that from talking with both the students and talking with the instructors. And so it turned out to be a really good site. From Dr. Wilson, Dr. Lucchese, soon to be Dr. Lucchese, and looking at there and just talking about how information that is told during certain times that is important. And I said this is similar to how certain stories are told during certain seasons, times and seasons, telling certain stories out of seasons. And so when there is a Native person in the classroom working with Native students, that definitely it is important in looking at how the students are looking at information and sharing information at certain times, but also not sharing certain information at certain times. And these are some of the references that I included in some of the study. That I have quite a few more. This is what is here today. Questions, and thank you.